evening. But in any case, we have these all of these seminar series recorded, and the goal of the seminar series, I'm just trying to remove a little pop-up that's come into my window and I can't seem to get away from it, but I'll just speak with what I think is behind it. The seminar mission is to provide opportunities for the STIR community to interact, learn from one another, and grow worldwide. So it's pretty wide open. And as most people know, STIR methodology has sort of three distinct characteristics in terms of apparatus. One is what we call the decision protocol, which is basic. It's a model of decisions, and we use that to ask probing questions about the environment that the decision maker or practitioner happens to be in at the time. Another is a set of heuristics and an overall ethos and techniques for conducting what we call STIR decision protocol exercises. And we sort of lump these under the idea of an embedded humanist, someone who follows a certain set of rules of engagement. And then finally, we analyze the results using the framework of midstream modulation, which is designed to capture change over time along human, social, and material dimensions. So why do we conduct this research? Well, we want to basically understand expert capacities to perform what's called socio-technical integration. Others have given it different names, but it's clear that it's a capacity to do something more than what they're trained to do in their scientific and engineering educations. And it's something that goes beyond what the cultural expectations of scientists and engineers tend to be. So for many people, it's easy to do and it happens all the time. Others find it more difficult. And so there's just an absolute range of expectations and experiences on both sides, both the people that we study and engage with, as well as those of us who conduct STIR exercises in terms of what our expectations and assumptions are about, say, the level of reflexivity of the people that we study and engage with. We also want to explore the capacities of scientific experts and scientifically trained specialists to take more into account, to expand their decision making, and then to really assess to what extent it makes sense for society and policymakers and administrators and members of the public to ask experts to take more into account. And then finally, there is a sort of secondary objective of STIR, and that is to actually exercise these capacities. And the reason I put this all the way down at number 3 as opposed to number 1 is because of this little star, that we only want to really intervene and promote, good democratic, deliberative, ethical norms insofar as it's within the scopes of 1 and 2 to understand and explore. And many people get the idea that STIR is designed mostly to come in and sort of make things different or make things happen or even make things better. And I think that's not quite the way to think about it. It's really a research program. So I like to say, remember the R in STIR. In any case, this general approach to STIR has been employed far beyond what I could have possibly imagined back in 2004, 2005, when I was just sort of fumbling around as a graduate student in a laboratory trying to figure out a method that would help me understand to what extent can we as a society ask scientists and engineers and other technically trained specialists to do more than what they're essentially trained to do. So we've had around the world something like, over 80 STIR studies. And most of these STIR studies are 12 weeks in duration, and they've resulted in a number of publications and even more in-house non-published studies. So there's really a lot of knowledge to be gained and to be shared, and hence this STIR seminar series. And I'm very, very happy and thrilled to have my dear friend and colleague, François Thoreau, joining us to give us this seminar. François has been there since the beginning. He was one of the original team of stirrers in what we were calling at the time the STIR project. We didn't know that it would keep going and turn into a STIR program. But François was actually one of the original 10 members, and later it turned into 20. And then that was the first wave of STIR, and then we have had like 4 or 5 waves, who knows. François has had a very nice career since that time. He, at the time, was a doctoral student and soon afterwards became a postdoctoral researcher, and now he's actually an associate professor at the University of in Belgium. And a little bit about, as most of you know, is not an easy thing to achieve to be recognized by the European Research Council at this point, especially for someone that is sort of still in the early stages of their career. So quite an achievement, and really grateful, François, that you could be here today. So I will stop sharing my screen and invite you to take over.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I'll try to share my screen again. I sort of lost it. Okay, that should do. Can you see it?
Not yet. There might be one more button to click.
Yeah, somehow my arrow disappeared.
Yeah, that happened to me too.
Okay, so let's try another way. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
I think that's better.
Nice.
It was because it was already in full screen and then it got lost in confusion. Okay, can you see it already? Okay, good. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric. I don't know if everyone got a lag at the exact moment you were presenting me. I couldn't hear anything, so I don't know if you captured them a little bit, but otherwise it's no problem. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for inviting me in this seminar series. I'm very happy to be online with you. I'm very excited to hear that this STIR project turned into a program, which means it has a legacy and that there are still people coming in and keeping the good spirits and bringing some new oxygen, which I think is the best thing that a program could aim for, right? So I guess for me, when you asked me to talk today, my first thought was, wow, this is so long ago. I have to collect like real old memories. But I guess the main insight I got from STIR is perhaps not necessarily about the research itself, but the way research is being done and carried out. I mean, one of the things that has been very important to me being enrolled in this program was that it was a very much collective endeavor. There was a team of people, and Eric had this money from the National Science Foundation and would invite us in different places, which were all most amazing, one from the other. And then we would gather together with many different PhD students. We would share our insights, our fieldwork, our results, our findings. And I really think this is so important at the stage of being a PhD student, not feeling isolated, being surrounded by other fellow PhD students with the generous and kind supervision of people who are there to nurture your research and to deliver you insights and not to steal your results. I think this is all very important, and I try to live up to that standard of collectiveness in research. And I do think this is even more important nowadays that we live in times of, whatever you call it, Anthropocene or Capitalocene or whatever scene. I think social sciences and humanities are dealing with problems which are increasingly, too big to apprehend from an individualistic point of view. You really need the team and the collective to move together on these topics. You cannot go there on your own. I mean, less and less so. So, yeah, I think on that account, STIR program, the STIR project and program was really important for me in terms of making it a collective thing. So I just have one example of this increasing relevance and timeliness of STIR sort of interdisciplinary collaborations. I'm now based, like Eric just said, at the University of Liège in Belgium. And no later than, I think, 2 months ago, the engineering school came to us asking, okay, we are totally lost in translation here. There's been a very important buzz, like last year, some students from a business school went to a graduation ceremony, and during that graduation ceremony, they just said, okay, you know what? We have the diploma, but we don't give a shit. This is not what we want to do. There's no sense in what you offer us. We don't want your career. We don't want your money. We don't want your word. Just get lost. And now in business schools, in engineering schools, I think there's an increasing quest for relevance of what is it that we're doing? What is our practice? What is it our contribution? And so the engineering school came to us, STS scholars in Liège, saying, okay, we really need some STS classes to learn about how to make sense of all of this, to put some narrative layers on what is it that we're doing. Otherwise, we're going to lose the students, so it's important to us. And so we don't really necessarily need to comply, we can also increase the mess. But I think it's really a sign that the times are changing. I think back in 2009, when I got first enrolled on the STIR, it was an issue on whether or not you could get access to the laboratory, how it could be dealt with, what was the demands of the day, And I think, yeah, the doors are increasingly opening wide for STS scholars or social sciences and humanities to engage, I guess, somehow. So that was a long introduction. My plan today is to tell you a bit about me and where I am now, reflect on my STIR experience, and then in the second part of the talk, making some wild reflections about interdisciplinarity, which mostly stem from my own experience. But I don't know how it's practiced, this seminar series, but I do not take issues if you want to interrupt or just raise questions on the go. Otherwise, I believe between point 1 and 2 there's going to be times for Q&A, so you can either save it for the break or you can just break it on the go. Please feel free. So yeah, actually, it's all going to be about me, so I'm not going to make a specific about. It's going to be about me in the STIR and me afterwards. So you're going to have plenty of me around, so I don't need to put that in evidence. So, like I assume you're all familiar with the main elements that compose the STIR program that Eric just told you about. I guess the main idea was this idea of midstream modulation. So the way I remember it was that midstream is supposed to be not too much upstream when they're just ideas or hypotheses about possible developments, neither downstream when it's already on the market and there are many locks in and pathways that have been followed, and it's very difficult to to trace it back to when the stakes were hot, which is in the midstream stage, precisely when you have, let's say, the proof of concept or prototype sort of stage of development, the moment where you can actually still have a say on the configuration of an object or a technique that is still in a formative stage of development. So it was in 2009 that I made a visiting scholarship at ACU. It was very early in my PhD days. Like, I was a PhD student by, I think, October 2008. And I think by November, just like right the next month, Michiel van Oudesden told me about this very nice fellow based in ACU, which is named Eric Fisher, who has this super nice program, which I might be interested in, being enrolled. And so I said, yeah, sure, why not? I was just getting started, I was very young. So 3 months later, I was in Arizona for 6 months, mostly getting some training, attending classes, reading literature about this weird thing that's called nanotechnologies. For all dinosaurs like me, it rings a bell. It's something that everybody was speaking about 12 years ago. I guess it kind of disappeared out of the radars. I mean, not totally, but it's not the hype it used to be. And I was very polite and also very wise a student. So I spent most of my days in ASU trying to define what nanotechnologies were. But on that account, the visiting scholarship was sort of a failure because when I came back home, I still didn't have a clear definition of what it was actually I was about to do my PhD about. I guess my STIR interventions were really helpful in helping me understand that nanotechnologies was certainly a matter of scale, like all those things at the nanoscale, also a matter of techniques, like some specific microscopes and stuff. But it was also about new properties of the matter. Then it was about prospects for industrial development, for a new industrial revolution. Then you had to put on board, let's say, science policies, public policies of your research and development, of innovation. Then you would have all the economist projection in terms of market value, in terms of growth, in terms of how big nano was about to be. Then you had the competition between all the big technological zones coming in the picture. Then you had the activists and the NGOs screaming at the wolf and saying nano was evil. And actually, it took me a while to figure out this is how you define nano, right? This is all the dimensions you need to include if you want to have like a full-fledged figure of what nanotechnology is about. I called it a layer definition, like it's an onion. You can peel it, on different layers. So that's what I do. Back in 2009, I was trying to figure that out. Then I went on the second from let's say the autumn time, I went to IMEC, which is the microelectronics laboratory in Everlee, Leuven, to carry out a first STIR intervention. And then the next year I did another one at the UC Louvain. It was in 2010. And then I was a little bit less well disciplined, so I not only went to the lab, but I also went to some scientific networks and consortiums that was trying to build a nano as something for Walloon region, which is one of the two parts of Belgium in terms of science policies, because Belgium is divided, like Dutch speaking and French speaking. And at the time, the French speaking were trying to structure themselves and to organize, or to coordinate the efforts in terms of nanotechnology developments. So I also followed that process, which was a bit out of the lab, but which was important to figure out what were the dynamics in the lab as well. I did remind the story of Evelyn. Evelyn was a PhD student in Leuven. And I think that case was the most striking for me because she was actually lost in her PhD. And since I was only getting started, and there was, I would feel like an imposter. I would feel there were so many tools or knowledge that I wouldn't possess. I was very much questioning myself about why I was there, what I was doing there. And I guess I could relate in that sense to Evelyn, because Evelyn had a PhD project. The PhD was fairly simple. She had to sample olfactive cells, from the nose of mice, and then culture them in order to spread those cells on brain chips. So it was a microelectronics laboratory, and that particular team I was engaging with was trying to build a prototype of brain chip. So there were a lot of research about how do you insert a chip in the brain in order not to damage the tissue. So the width, the thickness, the pace of insertion. You want to not to damage any brain cells. So you try to find an adequate way to insert the chip, and there were many studies going on about how that should be done. The idea being that the chip could actually interact somehow with the neurons, the synapses, and they had in mind all sorts of medical perspectives. For example, in terms of Alzheimer's disease, people getting just senile and losing their shits. They were trying to sort that out with those chips, and there was this idea that with those chips we could develop like olfactive sensors. Which are sensors that do not react to movement, for example, or to temperature, but they would react to smell. So that was the first step of the PhD. That was to grow those olfactive cells in the lab in those Petri boxes, and then you could use it for the chips and make all sorts of studies with that. But the thing is, it never really quite worked, because those cells are really difficult to grow in a lab. And so she was keeping on failing the experiment over and over again. And it was very difficult because in the scientific literature, there was nothing about it, because many people would try to grow those cells worldwide, but very few would actually succeed. And there was a handful of exceptions, like a couple of papers which have been published that would signal it was possible to do it. So it served as an impetus for a manager to say, yeah, you see, it can be done. You can do it. Go for it. Keep on trying. And she was very anxious about it, because she would keep on failing over and over again and telling me, yeah, sure, there's a bunch of papers, but those papers are just not very fair. Like they failed 49 experiments, and maybe the 50th was a little bit of a success. And so they just went on what worked a little bit and made it a paper, but that's not really reliable. Like I cannot really rely on that to develop a successful protocol. She was very embarrassed. And then of course she had the pressure of the funding was not forever. It was a short-term funding, as most PhDs. Of course, it was also a publish or perish, because she was very much aware of the fact that if she wouldn't succeed to grow those cells, then she couldn't publish, because you couldn't publish really failed experiments. You had to show, that you succeeded somehow. And yeah, so she was very in a zone of discomfort. And in retrospect, it really made me think about all this invisible work of reproduction. I mean, scientists like Evelyn, they are legends in laboratories who are doing the small work of reproduction, which is very important, but often made invisible by the publication strategies of the journals, which only acknowledge successes or successful experiments. And so there's a whole bunch of work that just goes beyond the radars, because they don't really make it to the proof of concept or the success experiment. And that was one of the questions that came while I was there in Leuven. For the record, Evelyn also was involved in this ethical problem with the mice. because there were transgenic mice that they were using grown in for laboratory purposes, and every time they would be delivered some mice at the laboratory, the commercial of the firm would put some extra mice as a commercial gift, like a commercial gesture. And every time they were really pissed about it, because the protocol would say we need 36 mice, or I don't know, 50 mice, and the guy would deliver like 10% more, but they were like, we have no way to keep these mice, so we have to kill them, and it's not part of the protocol. So killing a mice to sample the cells is fine, but having to kill extra mice just because the guy, it means well, but for Christ's sake, we don't have anything to store the mice. We don't have like a animal husbandry here. We cannot deal with these mice, so we have to kill them. And yeah, that I think that was the most problematic issue in terms of their own ethical reflection on the research. So this is part of those things that I observed while I was in Leuven, trying to put them in the decision protocol. So what are the considerations? What are the decisions that are being made? What are the considerations? What could be the alternatives, and what are the outcomes of all of this when you shake it up? When you stir it up. And I remember this feedback meeting. So at the end of my my time in the lab, I'm invited to talk at one of the lab meetings, and I tell them about those kind of things. So trying to make it to a cell culture, or the ethical problems with the mice and stuff. And at the end, the manager of the team comes to me, and in private, not in front of everyone, and he says, "Well, François, I'm sort of disappointed, because it's called Wolfgang. Wolfgang just got to the management of the team. It was a rather large team, like if I remember well, like 25, 30 sort of people. And he just was appointed manager, and he was really striving to develop and expand the team within IMEC, which is a very large facility. I think it's about back in the days it was about 1,500 to 1,600 researchers, so it was kind of huge. And so as compared to this really big research facility, Wolfgang's team was rather small. And he really had ambitions to expand it internally and to make it grow and make it bigger. And he comes to me and says, "François, I'm a bit disappointed, because at the time I was doing this intervention, he was also in an active, proactive quest to find profitable markets and outcomes for the research of his team. So he was not often there, because he was going to Siemens or Philips, or like big tech giants, to discuss what would you be interested in, where should I orient my research towards, how could I frame the work of my team in such a way that you would be interested in what is it that we're doing. So he was trying to anticipate as much as he could market developments, market prospects, in order to make his team successful internally. And he told me, "François, I thought that this is what you were about to do," like market prospects and telling me where the team should go, providing me guidance about this market-driven research. And I was like, whoa, I think there's been some misunderstanding here. This is not what I'm doing. And I guess it speaks to the ambiguities of knowledge-based economies, where knowledge is so important for innovation, R&D purposes. And yeah, I don't know how long I'm talking already, but we have still 1 hour to go, right?
Yeah, that's right, François. 1 hour to go, so it's fine.
Yeah, sure, plenty of time, because I will keep on elaborating on this idea of mythology. So I was wondering, where is the mythology? In laboratory life, Thoreau speaks of researchers' mythology, saying that researchers' activities pertain to mythology, like a framework in the broadest meaning of the term, within which practices of a particular culture may be situated. At the end of that IMEC intervention, I really was thinking about this market-driven research in terms of a methodology. This is what animates researcher. This is how they orient the efforts. This is where they're heading to, you know, somehow. And then when you get somehow in the way with a cell culture that keeps on failing, you're failing not only yourself as a scientist, you're also failing the market prospects and whatever could be used for your research and whatever outcomes might get out of it. I thought it was very important to consider the broader cultural dimensions. If economy could be, for example, one of those cultural traits that you can find very much present in the laboratory such as IMEC, which is also, I mean, it's a private public laboratory, but it's very much profit oriented. So it just makes sense that you find what the institutional configuration is made to I mean the purpose of the institution. The purpose was a bit different, coming back to the previous slides, in UC Louvain, which is a French-speaking university, where I made a second engagement more in a fundamental research oriented laboratory. And I remember like the surprise of the researchers there, because I said, look, guys, I'm here to make an intervention. And I said, yeah, sure, welcome. What is your intervention about? I'm like, yeah, I would like to see what are the sorts of decisions you're making on a daily basis, what in your practices. And I would like to challenge them a bit. I would like to discuss with you, you know, whether it could be done differently or whether there would be some alternatives. And they were like, yeah, sure. I mean, alternatives is our daily business. This is what we look for. This is what we aim for. And they were designing, for example, new generations of polymers, like, you know, plastics with carbon nanotubes, for example, that could be used to make, for example, new generations of windmills that would be lighter, or new car pieces that would be lighter and still conductive of electricity. And they had this sort of scientist amazement for nature. Like I remember talking with the head of the lab, which was called Laurent Francis, and Laurent was telling me about how he was inspired by butterflies and all their colors and their shapes, and how he was fascinated by the wonders of nature. And maybe half an hour later in the conversation, he told me, yeah, we could totally redefine what textile are and find some very nice outcomes in terms of delivering new generation of colors and new shades of multicolors, things like butterfly-like to textile manufacturers. So yeah, the amazement was never far from the actual market outcome or, you know, change. But they mostly in that lab, they thought in their own role as scientists in terms of environmental change. So they were very interested in solar cells, solar panels, windmills, all that sort of environmental devices that could decrease energy consumption, be lighter, they had all this program to coat the windmills in such a way that they wouldn't perturb the signal from airplanes' radars. Like I don't really remember exactly, but it was a nano coating that you would paint the windmill with, and that would make it easier for airplanes to cohabit with windmills, because apparently they had some issues. I don't really remember exactly, but my point here was that they were kind of surprised when I told them about alternatives. They were like, yeah, this is all we're seeking for. This is what we want to do. This is what we want to achieve. And they really had a strong sense of their environmental responsibility. Like, you know, François, I'm coming every day to the lab on my bicycle. And this is very important to me. Like, I wouldn't take my car. So it really felt like I was like like an agent controlling whether they were environmentally suited, you know, like like if they could deserve a green card for respecting environment. So it was very funny that they put me in that role, because I wasn't really asking for that, but that's what they came up with. And it, for me, it triggered a reflection about the scientist being sometimes perhaps a bit clumsy with how you define your own responsibility, but being very aware of that environmental responsibility, trying to foster it, to nurture it in any way they could. And sometimes it got me a bit puzzled with respect to the STIR protocol, because I was like, yeah, but it seems that like these folks seem pretty much to know what they want and what is their own version of what is the good research, what is the sense of the research they're doing, the direction they want to go towards. And I wasn't sure whether it was really my job to, you know, to unfold their decisions and see how it could be otherwise, because they seem to do it by themselves pretty much. So I had a bit of, you know, reflection about that. And yeah, and then I guess in terms of mythologies, I came up with this, yeah, you know, turning to another point now. I hope you're not lost till there, so that's all fine for everyone. Yeah. So I guess my PhD in the end was about questioning precisely the role of social sciences and humanities within nanotechnologies development. You know that it was kind of a trauma for the European Commission when the Commission had to put a ban on GMOs development. Well, we could discuss whether this ban was really effective or not, or to which extent it was effective. But it came as a trauma in the sense that they thought, we're doing this for the sake of, you know, scientific development. This is progress. Now we want to feed the world. We want to contribute to greater societies, to advances in technological development. So we don't really understand why people seems to be pissed off whenever it is that we talked about food and stuff like that. And so they got much inspiration from the National Nanotechnology Initiative in the US that really put that idea of responsible development up front, and the European Commission did the same with nanotechnologies. In my analysis, it was the first time that on a structural basis, to such an extent in science policies and R&D policies, there would be some room for social sciences and humanities. So not only in terms of public health, I mean safety or health issues, but also in terms of legal, social aspects. So I think nanotechnologies is the first systematic attempt at integrating social scientists in a particular innovation, you know, development or trend. And it was mostly done under the label of responsible innovation. So I came to terms with that idea of responsible innovation, trying to question this idea of involving social scientific and social sciences and humanities within nanotechnology development, because I think that was really in the end the object of my PhD, the topic. And responsible innovation, you know, it's a funny expression. I never really quite got it, because responsible sort of entails that we know what we're doing, right? We are responsible. We can account for whatever developments is happening. But in the same time, innovation is about novelty, is about exploring the unknowns, trying new things, new ideas, being creative. So I always wondered, how is it that you can be creative and bring about novelty while being responsible? I mean, you can do that only if you really account for the consequences, but that was not what I was witnessing. You know, the consequences, unintended consequences, but how can you be responsible if you cannot foresee really the consequences? Because I guess that's my view. I was like, is that an oxymoron? Is that a contradiction in the terms? Or is it a pleonasm? Like if you say to scientists or innovators, are you responsible? They would say, sure, we are very responsible. We know what we do. You know, we are very cautious. We are running safety studies. We don't do whatever. You know. So yeah, I'm still a bit puzzled by this expression, which I never could really understand. But maybe you have had insights about it, and maybe you can enlighten me a bit. From what I gathered from science policies, it was about mostly maximizing the benefits of a particular development, but minimizing the risks. So it was a sort of balance between risks and benefits, assuming that you could know the former and know the latter, which I guess was sort of not reflecting the state of funding of research and development since about, I guess, 95% of the research goes to actual developments, and maybe, I don't know, 5% on health issues, toxicity, and then another 1, 2, 3% to philosophical, social stakes and all. So there's kind of let's say that in that general overall balance, the focus is more on the benefits than on the risks. That's how I came to understand it. Also, responsible innovation is not very clearly defined. I mean, there are attempts to define it from the European Commission, for example, from René von Schomburg, who you probably, I think, intervened in those series. I'm not sure, but these are, you know, very wordy definitions, a lot of words, but which are not always unfolded. Like it's all a language about governance, how it should be inclusive, participatory, and sometimes it does not really says what it does, in my view. But I understand and I appreciate responsible innovation is a break apart from hard binding regulations, which might not be possible in the very early stages of development of a technology. So I guess everyone is trying to experiment to cope with the uncertainties and all the unintended consequences the way it is possible. But yeah, I guess that's sort of also our own mythology as embedded scholars or social scientists dealing with those new tech developments. Yeah, I'm not going to go more in depth about the European Commission strategy on nanotechnologies. I wanted to tell you a bit about how they translated responsible innovation, but it was mostly about enhancing competitiveness through accelerated market uptake, improvement of already existing processes. So I guess if you would make an analysis of the nano R&D strategy, it was mostly about integration of R&D with industrial development. And I think you somehow, being a PhD student dealing with nanotechnologies and being a STIR embedded scholars in laboratories dealing with scientists who want to develop such prototypes and proof of concept within such a framework, this is a dimension I really had to account for. That the integration, I might understand it as making changes in the laboratory, but they would understand integration in a totally different way. So there was also differences that you could address in terms of what integration means for whom. And in that respect, I could witness it over and over again. I will tell you a bit more about my other fieldworks, which I carried out afterwards, about SHS interventions, but very often oriented towards public acceptance or societal benefits. So it entrenches a sort of division of labor of what the lab strives for is market integration, development of prototypes, access to new markets, and what they want social scientists to do is either anticipate the demands of the day, like I said earlier, or to make sure there's going to be public acceptance. There won't be any backlash or public opinion problems. So I'm not making a general claim here. It really depends on the people and the institutions and the interlocutors. But in my overall assessment of the nanotechnologies, science policies and innovation policies, the trend was really clear that the idea was to anticipate potential trouble from public opinion, backlashes, and to pacify them, to sort of anticipate them in such a way that there won't be a problem. So do the public agree? And if not, how to make it agree? I'm being caricatural on purpose here because I think provocation is an integral part of the STIR endeavor, right? And finally, those tools are a lot about those tools of responsible innovation, and as tools of regulation are mostly informative, so they are much based on discourses. And for example, there was a code of conduct on responsible nanosciences and nanotechnologies. And when it comes to hard binding regulation, there was this case of European definition for what is a nanotechnology, and that one was very not appropriate. It would define nanotechnologies as either manufactured or natural particles, which means basically every sort of very tiny thing. This is not very operational. This is not a definition you can use as to constrain, the nanotechnology development, or to make use of it. And I know because Brice Laurent was following from Mines Paris was following that very closely, the elaboration of this definition, and it was made in such a way that it would be too large of a scope to actually catch some specific problems and issues tied with nanotechnologies development. So I guess that's my take on situating also the intervention in this broader framework, policy framework in nano sciences and technologies development. And I think it's very important for what you could call, I didn't put it in the slides, but what you could call a non-innocent standpoint, borrowing from Donna Haraway perspectives. That it's important to get also the larger picture of what is your own positionality, and what is this agenda in terms of R&D developments and public endeavor towards new technologies and new sciences, to be not to be innocent about or naive like I was back in the days perhaps, and still am in many accounts, going to the lab, because this is the perhaps where the big picture comes to challenge your own scope and frame, I guess. So maybe a small word about embeddedness, this notion of embeddedness. I do think it's a very interesting notion. Literally, I never occurred to me before yesterday when I was preparing this talk, but it never occurred to me that embeddedness was literally meaning something like going to bed with. And I thought, wow, this is for me it was a breakthrough. I mean, we all need to go to bed sometimes with others, right? And for the better, for the worse. So I think this notion is telling about how important it is to be close to the practices we're following, to the interlocutors we're talking to the actual ground of daily practices, and where things are warm and happening. But of course, it's also full of troubles and tensions. I guess there was some embedded journalists during the war in Iraq that were funded by the military and the George W. Bush administration. So they would send journalists to go with the military in Iraq, and there was no formal constraints on those journalists, like in terms of censorship, or you need to say this or you need to say that. There was a bet that the sole fact of sharing beds with soldiers on the ground would create such an empathy or such a proximity that you wouldn't be criticizing from from your comfortable chair in your office in Washington, saying, wow, these militaries are mistaken and this is all wrong. There was this idea that proximity would create something. And actually, this is where it's super ambiguous and super interesting, is that you could compare that with whatever is it that we try to do with scientists. It's like a choreography where you get really close, and at the same time trying also to come up with your own stakes and perspectives on the topic. And it's I think it's good not to claim our right to be out of there and being far away from actual situations and saying science is this, technology is that, from our outer point of view. I think it's good that we engage with the laboratory, with the practices, at the risk of proximity and at the risk of going native somehow. But again, there's a thing I think that this whole embeddedness of journalists and reporters in the Iraq War was about who gets to tell what stories, who get to master the narratives about the war. And I guess there is a very hot spot in scientific and technological developments around the questions of narratives, because it didn't I guess you captured as well as I do that our world seems to be going through a series of catastrophes or disasters, or let's say at least problematic events, and somehow it seems that the reference to progress is no longer actionable for scientists, like progress for its own sake, progress in itself. I mean, I think less and less people, and scientists included, do buy it. Like, it's gonna go well. It's for the best. It's gonna be fine. I think progress is losing traction as a narrative. That's the guess. And if that guess is right, then we need to come up with new narratives. I guess this is what an increasing amount of scientists are trying to do with environmental dimensions of the research, or environmental scope or aims of the research, or trying to protect the sick people or the elderly. Those are the societal dimensions that are retranslated, like a healthy population, happy senior people. This is how societal dimensions gets translated when progress as such is not really something you can deal with anymore. You have to account again for what is it that you want to do, where you want to go with your research. And again, that's full of ambiguity, because I think it's good, but it's also in this it's also intertwined with markets, developments, prospects for jobs creation, growth, access to new markets and stuff. But my point is here that if some new repertoires of legitimacy, of legitimation of scientific and technological actions are needed, then social scientists and humanities scholars are also needed, because that's what we do. We bring in complexity, we bring in narratives, we bring in ways of telling stories in the world that include sciences and technologies. And I guess if you want to make it a caricature, you could say there's the point where either us as embedded scholars, or them as scientists, hard scientists, let's say, or technological, technology developers or whatever, somehow you need to choose to take side. Either you want to go for a profitable model for market, for prototypes, for profit science and technologies, or you have to account for the societal dimensions of your research. It might, of course, be that the two collide and the two get together, but I think it's a matter of dispute. What is it that your research contributes to, and what is it that you want to do with it? And again, to put it another way, is that there's a struggle going on the repertoires of legitimation of scientific and technological developments. which are the result of the fact that progress is no longer self-explanation or self-obvious. So that, that's just hypothesis, right? Open for discussion. So the last slide to conclude with this, and I hope I was clear. What I learned from Stir, and I really try to nurture as precious learnings in whatever I do now, is to go where it is warm, like going in the lab in the middle, like putting your hands in the dirt. I think it's super important, and it is where things are happening, like in the middle. This whole idea, I think, remains very important to me. Also, this idea of engaging, so not being afraid of taking positions and interacting with actors, which are the first concerned by those scientific and technological developments. So, getting rid of sort of a external neutrality posture, I think, is really, really important. And get hands-on with practices is super important as well, I think. I mean, practices is the place from which you can start to think what is important to each of the people there, what is important to scientists, what is important for me, how can we negotiate over those practicalities, I mean, hands-on with whatever they do. What was more problematic for me in my experience, so it's really my own understanding, but perhaps Eric can prove me wrong, right? Is that sometimes I felt like decision protocol would, in itself, by its own configuration, entrench a sort of a division of moral labor, where we would get to tell about the possible alternatives, but wouldn't really, let scientists prove us wrong. I mean, there was feedback sessions where they could be they could tell us if they don't get it or they don't really understand what is it that we try to do, but still the decision protocol would entail some ideas that they would need to be someone to discuss about the ethical or broader societal concerns, and that would be the embedded social scholar. So I had a concern it might dispossess the ability of scientists to reflect by themselves on their own practices if they have someone coming from the outside to tell them, how it should be done. Then I had questions about the possibility of a common language. I will come back to that in the second part of the presentation. I was wondering whether this common language could be, set up front, like in general, or if it could be, or if it should be negotiated, and to which extent would the words that we would share with scientists be the actual same words or have very different meanings. So that's more of a question. I'm in a zone of trouble for me where I wasn't clear about how to make a language that enables us to interact, to engage with, and fruitfully collaborate with scientists. I guess sometimes I felt like, but perhaps that's because I was young, like I said, this imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing here? On whose behalf am I talking? Cui bono, who is it good for? Those are the questions that I had in my mind all the time. I was an embedded scholar, like questioning my own legitimacy of being there and engaging with scientists. And lastly, I grew increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of the decision protocol itself, in the sense that it was engaging with decision in the first place, which means the knowledge we were there to produce and foster with scientists was to be informative to public policies or to decision-making processes. And I was wondering, isn't it too early, or is it always what we can come up with from the laboratory, something we can decide upon? Isn't there other sort of knowledges, descriptions that we could, that are very informative on many accounts, but which do not necessarily lead to knowledge, to decision-making knowledge? So that's I guess what I got. Of course, it's an impartial account and perhaps even unfair. So Eric will tell us. That's it for the first part of the talk. So maybe it's time to take a break and that everyone can have a say.
Great, thank you, François. Yeah, let's open it up now to questions, comments. And we've got about half an hour left, so I think we want to leave some time for François to get through the second part and maybe have some discussion there. But there's some nice provocations here. I wonder if other people are aware. Yeah. So Marika, let's have you jump in.
Yeah, first of all, many thanks for these interesting anecdotes. And I think even though it was 10 years ago, you remembered quite a lot of details. So yeah, that was really vivid and nice to listen to. And my questions actually refer more to the paper on which your talk was based. And of course, yeah, the issues also, you touched upon them, I think. The first one is that you say, in a way, we need to give more space to scientists to resist. To, for instance, let them challenge the assumption that scientists are unreflexive, which is a little bit embedded in the idea of, we need a steer intervention in order to enhance socio-ethical reflections in the lab. And I wonder, okay, if we let scientists resist, what then? So in your paper, you describe this moment, and you also mentioned this today about the scientists saying, actually, I think a lot about the environment. But other than noting this and maybe reflecting in the steer process, okay, pre and post interview environmental issues were very big on the agenda all the time. So they're not really deliberate modulations related to the steer protocol. Other than that, I'm not sure what to do with this resistance, because I didn't see from the paper that you revised your method. Or is this what you would do if you were to do your steer intervention in a second way? So I think, to put it in a nutshell, the question is how to make listening to scientists' resistance, how can we make this productive for steer, to do steer better or different? And then my second question is about something I find very interesting in your paper, where you say, actually, what's interesting, or what we should attend to and steer, is when things do not go as we expect. So when steer surprises us. So a lot, I think this is also a lot in line with Stenger's work on surprising experiments, and how we should also, design experimental setups that surprise rather than those that can confirm our hypothesis. And here again, I was curious whether you also have some anecdotes about these very surprising moments that really shifted your perspectives, and then also maybe resulted in other ways of doing research. So yeah, I'm curious more to hear more about these moments when you were surprised by the researchers. And maybe these were already the examples you gave. I'm not sure, but yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Should I answer that or take other questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, I had much fun working with a colleague who is named Vinciane Després, who is a good friend of Isabelle Stenger's. We did some fieldwork after the STIR interventions because I was telling her a bit about my feelings of this, this experience. And she told me, François, you have an appetite for provocation. That's obvious. I said, yeah, sure, Vinciane. What should I do with it? And she told me, come on, we're going to meet some scientists and we're going to tell them they are unable to think about what is it that they do. Like they have no capacity for reflexivity. And let's see how they answer that. So that's what we did. We went to the lab and we said, okay, we social scientists, we think that we are not reflexive. And this is where Vinciane is super smart. She anticipated that they would come up with the idea, but what is reflexivity? How would you define it? And she told me, François, we cannot define it for them, because if we define what reflexivity is or entail, they will answer to that definition, and somehow it's going to set the tone, right? So we want to leave it open. So what we want to do is what we call together a diplomatic aimed incident. So we want to put that provocation in the air, and then we want to suspend it. We don't want to answer it. So that's how it happened on every interview. We think we are not reflexive, and they said, what do you mean by reflexivity? And I said, well, sure, we would like to define it for you, but we can't, because otherwise we would tell you what is it that we think, but we are interested in what you think. And the interesting thing there was that I think we met like 10 or 12 scientists, I don't remember exactly. They all came up with very different versions of what reflexivity was or was entailing for them. Oh, for me, this would be this, or maybe referring to that. And they came up with stories and things, and every one of them, some were referring to scientific fraud, some moral concerns with carrying out research that will lead to military developments or weapons, new generation of weapons. Some other would deal with the conditions of work or the precarity of contracts. It would go in all sorts of directions, sometimes engaging with the very practice itself, and or the environmental responsibility. And we made a sort of juxtaposition of all these different versions, saying, look, it's important to remember that reflexivity is not predetermined. We don't have any, there's no substantial meaning to what it is to be reflexive. It's a side of struggle. The very capacity to be reflexive is contested, and everyone has his own, their own perspective on what reflexivity is or entail. So yeah, and by the way, it was very much fun because I think it was a yeah, provocation is sort of something that I like to do. And then I guess for the surprise, yeah, that's what I've always been fueled by. I probably won't have much time to go into my further research, but I was dealing with this inquiry in the Biomedical Research Center a couple of years back, which is in Liège University Hospital. And when I got there, it was an inquiry on big data practices and genomics. And what really got me surprised is that there were cows all around the place, like pictures of cows on the walls, on screensavers. In the interviews, cows would keep on coming back all the time. At some point, I'm like, okay, what is going on here? I'm in the hospital. This is a biomedical research center. There is patients' diagnosis and laboratory for diseases and pathologies and so on. What are the cows doing there? And I wouldn't understand. And I really got obsessive about it because I wanted to get around with that, perplexity. And when I came back to my lab, I say, okay, there's something going on with the cows. I want to know what it is. And they told me, yeah, no, but François, the project is about human medicine. That's what we need to focus on. Like, no, something is happening with the cows. There's cows everywhere, all around the place. This is where I want to go. And they said, no, François, the project said the deliverables, we need. And I said, okay, challenge accepted. So I spent the next 3 to 4 years to make my case, to prove me right. Like, okay, I will do your thing about human medicine, but this is where I'm heading to. This is the cow thing, because this was the genuine important surprise, because the head of the Biomedical Research Center was a veterinarian coming from the veterinarian faculty. Many vets were going to the Biomedical Research Center and getting involved in human medicine. And there was intrication with the farming public agency sending researchers part-time to the Biomedical Research Center, part-time on the farming thing. And actually cows would bring a lot of cash flow to the laboratory, enabling some investments that would then be used for human medicine and diagnosis and things. Many entanglements that I thought were really interesting to explore. And that's what I'm doing now. But to tell you about the important world of surprises and amazement in whatever is it that I do now.
Great. Any additional questions or comments? I think it's worth spending a moment on some of François' provocations. They're worth thinking through because, to the extent that they can shed light on STIR methodology, either to clarify what it is or what it isn't, or what it has revealed, I think it's important. And so maybe I will weigh in. I'll accept François' invitation to engage with him on these provocations if no one else will. I think I want to start with Marika's sort of paraphrasing of what François says in the paper. And it's an idea that a lot of people think is true about STIR, that it's part of what STIR is, methodology. And the idea is that we need STIR interventions, in order to enhance reflections in the lab. So this is an idea, right, that maybe somebody believes, right? Policymakers might believe it, scientists and engineers might believe it, social scientists and humanities people might believe it, or they might contest it. But it's a statement, right? It's a statement that stir is needed for a certain type of reflection. Well, what's the status of this statement vis-a-vis stir methodology? Is this a baked-in assumption that stir methodology makes? Is it true that in order to practice stir methodology, one must agree with the statement that stir is needed to advance ethical reflection in the lab? I don't think so. I think that's a misunderstanding. I think that the claim that stir interventions are needed to enhance some sort of reflection is either a predisposition, it's prior to the methodology. It's a normative commitment that one brings to the methodology, just as one could bring the idea that humankind should be more peaceful, right? This is a normative predisposition that I could bring to the stir methodology. That's one status that it could have. The other status is that it could be an evaluative result that says, as a result of conducting stir exercises, I have come to the conclusion that stir is necessary to promote a certain type of normative reflection in the lab. So that would be my opinion, that it's not baked into the stir methodology. I would even, I think, contest the idea that either social scientists and humanities people are needed for a certain type of more responsive science. But this is maybe a secondary issue. And maybe to make my case a little more clear, if we think, well, stir is a certain methodology, and we can compare it to other methodologies, for instance, interviewing, conducting interviews. Is it necessary, if I go conduct interviews, that I have to believe that interviews are necessary to a certain end? No, I don't think it is. I think it's possible to view whether I'm doing interviewing, focus groups, participant observation, or stir. I think it's possible to say that there are normative predispositions about the method that are not necessarily baked into the method. So, I want to give François an opportunity to respond to that, but I also want to open it up because I think it's an important issue simply because, in my view, it's a misunderstanding of the methodology. But of course, that's just my view. So let's hear what others have to say, starting with François. If you want to, you can just let others go, and if you want, you can continue on with your second set of your presentation, of course.
Yeah, Marike.
I think that this actually relates very much to your point on positionality. And so in a way, I don't really think that there is necessarily a contradiction between what François is saying and what Eric is saying, because the STEER method is just often used in this context of responsible innovation. And this is exactly this normative standpoint that is attached to the method, because we are always using this in this, not always, often we use it in this wider responsible innovation and policymaking discourse. And in that sense, if we are not reflecting on positionality in our papers, then this normative attachment, and that it's actually an attachment to the method, remains unspoken. And that's why the impression that there is this inherent assumption of STEER thinking that people are not reflexive enough, that this is part of the method. But it's, again, this wider context and the positionality that we just need to highlight a little bit more. That would be, I think, one response. And then the second response, or it's actually more of a question to Eric, because I would also agree. I mean, the method is simply the STEER decision-making protocol. It's almost like an interview, where, I mean, it's you could actually, you can use it for different purposes and analyze it in different ways. but we often use analyzes with the midstream modulation framework. And the midstream modulation framework has in its description of the different concepts which we use to code the material, there it's written down that there is socio-technical integration going on always in the lab, but scientists are not necessarily aware of it all the time. And we see, and that's again coming to the second point, when we analyze the material, in a way we see that using the method has the effect of making them more reflective. So I would say, I wonder if it's somehow in the theoretical tools, so the analytical categories, there you could say they are having this assumption embedded that reflexivity is happening through applying the method. So in that sense, maybe it's more in the theory than in the method itself. But I guess that Eric is now saying, yes, but the theory is only something that I developed after seeing what the method was doing. So it's actually a grounded theory approach that was derived from your observations. So then again, it's more a matter of capturing the effects of the protocol use. Yeah, so these are my two thoughts, I think, on this. I hope they were somehow clear, and I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I don't know if I should respond to François, but I think I'll yield to François to decide, and then we'll go on to Christian.
Yeah, go on, Christian.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give a quick response to Marika then, because I think just the simplest way to put it is that the midstream modulation framework, which uses words like reflexivity, does not have baked in the assumption that reflexivity is only possible if a human being called a social scientist is using the protocol. Rather, it's a model for a certain type of learning. And this is posited to take place whether or not the STIR protocol is being enacted. It's posited to take place whether or not an embedded humanist is in the laboratory or not. There's three logical possibilities that doing STIR can have with respect to midstream modulation. Number one, it can stimulate midstream modulation where it didn't exist before. I don't believe this is what it does, but this is what some people think it does. Another thing that logically could happen is the protocol exercises could engage with and enhance and maybe deepen or slow down or speed up the reflexive modulation that's already happening. I think this is what we see in most STIR studies. And the third logical possibility is that doing STIR exercises can simply reveal the reflexive modulations that are happening anyway in the STIR, in the environment under study. So if I think everyone's free to choose and they say, well, I believe this is what should happen, or I believe that's what does happen. But these are secondary considerations. So I just wanted to bring that up. And so Puga, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And thank you, François, for the very nice talk. Just building up on this discussion, I want to come back to what François was talking a while ago, and was this thing that he was talking with his friend about the notion of reflexivity. And I think that in order to properly answer, I don't have the answer for this discussion, but I think that in order to properly answer the question, we would have to have way much more build-up definitions of the reflexivity that we want. First of all, of reflexivity in big, which is what François was talking about with his friend. What they were foreseeing, the scientists were going to say, like, what is reflexivity? What do you mean by reflexivity? First of all, and then what kind of reflexivity are we talking about? And after that, what does reflexivity requires? What are the let's say the necessary conditions for reflexivity to exist, such that you can say, at this point it didn't exist, at this point reflexivity exists. And once we have those categories well defined, I think we could better answer the question of how much necessary, or if it's necessary at all, a steer is, or how much good a steer is provoking reflexivity compared to other methodologies. But yeah, I think that in order to go farther in that discussion, we would have to have these categories more well defined. I don't know what do you think, Eric, or what François thinks?
Yeah, let's let François decide whether to answer that, take more questions, or move on.
Yeah, well, I guess this is very interesting discussion, and my inclination would be to leave STIR open, like Eric just said. There are different ways of carrying out STIR protocols. I mean, the protocol itself comes from somewhere. It is situated in a particular, let's say, configuration, but it's also appropriated every time by people in different ways, and that's also makes it for the richness of every appropriation. And they don't really have to, they somehow speak together because they come from the same place, but they also go in all sorts of varied directions, and I suppose that's fine and even desirable. So I'm not sure about this idea, though, of having categories of reflexivity up front, because it would be like having the Third International of Workers agreeing on what politics are, or anarchism for what matters. That's something I developed in the second part of the talk, which I don't think I really will have time to go in depth with, but I think this idea that's important in the STIR, to depart from actual practices, objects, techniques that you can engage with and discuss with, are places where notions of reflexivity are all the time in dispute, in conversation, in negotiation, but it has to be grounded in some sort of material. Otherwise, it would have to have everyone agree on a certification in reflexivity with all sort of parameters and guidelines, and it would be a nightmare to to have that coming about. Whereas in situations, with all the entanglements, the intrications, the complexities, then you have room to discuss over particular, let's say, material semiotic dimensions of an object or of a practice. That's what I would say.
Okay. Well, we could certainly do more to even situate the notion of reflexivity itself with respect to either the STIR methodology or François' research journey. I think it's important to not take it for granted, but at the same time to realize that it does have a sort of provocative quality to it in the first place. And I think we'll respect François' sense of just preserving its provocative essence without trying to break it down. So let's give Marika one more comment or question, and then we can get to the second half of François' presentation.
Yeah, I mean, if there's still time for one more question, I would like to ask something on affect, because actually you use in your paper again also some language about being moved by and moving with the researchers you engage with as an embedded humanist. Like you have a Latour quote there, but also a quote by Jessica Messman. And we've just talked before the seminar a little bit about both having worked with her. And of course, she in her also very much engaged method of video reflexive ethnography, which shares quite some common features with STIR. I mean, she really develops affect as method, and also really talks about how it's important to be responsive to the other researcher, also to be surprised actually, and to listen to their resistances, or also to be disturbed. So I'm curious whether you yourself have also spent more time developing this notion of an effective resonance or something along the lines, and how that plays a role in your work.
Disturbed. Right. Yeah, I do believe that the feeling of anger is one I can relate to and share with many scientists nowadays. Like the world is burning, literally. Like there are some repeated drought in Europe, continental Europe, and it seems like in this old continent that's called Europe, governments are going increasingly far right wing, and that do affect the way science and technologies are being, practiced or made possible in the first place. And I do think many people are increasingly pissed off by this complicated situation. And when you see the situation with migrant people in Europe, which is awful, many scientists we can really share and discuss about that. I think, with whatever happened with the global warming crisis, considerably changed the role and the position of sciences in societies. Like now, many scientists are actually tired of telling truth to power. Like we've been telling truth those last 4 or 5 decades, and it appears now they don't really give a shit. And so there's a feeling of betrayal, a feeling of shortcomings in terms of speaking truth to power. Like it's not how it's done. It's not the pedagogy, scientific pedagogy, that will save the day somehow or solve political problems. So I can see around me many scientists are politicizing and trying to have a claim or say that it is not necessarily assuming the goodwill or good faith or good intentions of policymakers, for example. I think this is sort of evolving really fast. So that, to answer, fast, but that I think that notion of anger, I can relate to with other scientists and share it. But also many more affects. I really do believe it's important to communicate on that level.
Thanks, Francois, and thanks for your question, Marika. I'm sorry, everyone, but I just looked at the time and we really are out of time. And so what I propose is that if anyone's interested, that we sort of have an extension of the STIR seminar. We'll maybe officially end it here and we can sort of break the recording off here, but then continue to talk. Anybody who wants to stay, I really want to hear what Francois has to say, but we're not going to require anyone to stay. And we'll have 2 videos so that way people can have the full experience. So if that's okay, we'll just sort of have this break. It's understood. I invite people to stay, and I invite Francois to keep going if he has the time. Hopefully we can have a second go.